Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gretchen Felker-Martin, author of Manhunt, and with me in conversation today is Christopher Golden, author of Indigo, Road of Bones, which we'll be talking about, and All Hallows, which I think is forthcoming next month, right, Chris?
Tomorrow, actually.
Damn, that's very quick.
Tomorrow. Thank you so much for doing this, Gretchen. I really appreciate it. I'm such a huge fan of Manhunt, and I'm so excited for the next one. So I really appreciate you taking the time for me.
Oh, it's pleasure's all mine. I think you're great. I loved Road of Bones. I actually just finished it last night. Um, and as far as I'm concerned, this is just an excuse to hang out with you and shoot the shit, which I'll take anytime. So
Exactly.
oh, and real quick, this Road of Bones is the Barnes and Noble January 2023 pick for thriller mystery of the month.
Yeah,
Which I was supposed to say during the introduction.
That's okay. And I'm super grateful to Barnes and Noble for that, because it's been huge, big boost for the book,
That's awesome. It's well deserved. So I wanted to start out by asking you what personally is the worst road trip you've ever been on in your life.
Oh my God. Wow, that's a good question. I would say, and I'll be quick because I always go on at length. It's not that it's worse, but we have had a lot of adventures thanks to my wife's parents are from Sicily. So we've had a number of adventures. In fact, the book that I'm writing right now is set in Sicily. And we were in Sicily, the whole family. There were like 15 of us, and we had like rented like a little minibus thing, right? And in Sicily in the summertime, it is like the opposite of Road of Bones, like how cold it is on the Road of Bones. That's how hot it is in Sicily in the summertime. I mean, just so sweaty. And of course, the bus didn't break down, but the heat stopped working. And it was not safe for us to continue. So we were on the side of the road for like 2 hours waiting for them to send another bus. And when they finally did, it was smaller. So I was left with the other bus with the no AC. I'm sorry, the AC had stopped working, right? So and that was quite an adventure. Yeah, on the road. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. I don't know. Road trips are such an interesting combination of like expansive and exciting, and also extremely cramped and like dominated by tiny petty concerns.
Yes.
That really comes across in Road of Bones. Like the characters are just constantly thinking about the minutia of the interior of the truck's cab in a way that I really loved. Have you ever driven truck?
Well, I mean, a truck. I've driven a Suburban. I've driven U-Haul trucks, but I've never driven a truck.
Yeah. Well, it comes across as very authentic.
Well, the thing about again, what attracted me so much to this setting was the fact that and again, it's so interesting to me because Yakutsk, which is the sort of larger city, not even a city, the larger town that's in this region, has been in the news in the last couple of weeks for being as cold as it is. And I'm just like, this is not new. The fact that it's 80 degrees below zero is not new to for them. But I was reading about it. I was just reading about how in the wintertime, if you are not in your home, your vehicle is your lifeline. If you're on the road in the wintertime there and your vehicle is not doing what it's supposed to do, you will die. Yeah. And so that immediately, that was like the sort of beginning of it for me.
Yeah, it's such a everything, even the most mundane terrain becomes like the great unknown. You're in the abyss.
Yeah.
When you were researching the Kolyma Highway and this whole sort of milieu, how did you approach that task? Like coming at the history of gulags and labor camps and forced labor?
Yeah, it was really interesting because it's such an old part of so it started with just learning that the road of bones existed, and then going to read about it and discovering the origin of the phrase road of bones, and how there are an unknown number, but presumably as many as 500,000 potentially dead gulag prisoners, workers under the road. And just the thought of that is so chilling, that it made me go deeper. It made me want to know more about, like, how did that happen? Why did it happen? And it was really the rabbit hole. And for me, research is there are two different elements of research. One for me is, I need to know a specific piece of information to add a certain verisimilitude to this scene. And then there's the rabbit hole. And both of them happen almost every single time that I'm researching anything. Like, there's all this stuff you don't need to know. But the thing that was so valuable for me in doing that kind of research, we're just bouncing all over the place, sort of like, oh, I found this interesting thing and this interesting thing. A really sort of disorganized form of research is you never know what you're going to find. And my favorite thing that I found that really influenced how I wrote the region and the characters, and reminded me, as so often I am reminded, how little I know, and how we never should make assumptions about the way people live, is that I found, I'm a very progressive minded, but I know that prior to finding this video, I was not going to be writing these characters as modern as they should be presented. But I found a video of these four guys who were these young, like 20-year-old reindeer herders who had, in the middle of the winter, in their traditional clothing, which they do wear, had made a music video to the tune of one of Taylor Swift's songs, and changed the lyrics so that the song in their language was about how difficult it is to get a girlfriend when you're a 20-something-year-old reindeer herder along the Colima Highway.
And that scene actually appears in the book.
Yes, a version of that scene appears in the book, and that was real. I found that, and I thought it completely changed. It spanked me. It reminded me, okay, wake up. Don't think of people just because they live so far away and in such a remote climate and in a place that feels like it should be divorced from anything modern. Don't assume that people are going. And again, no matter how how much you try not to think that way, it's very easy to fall into that thought process. So finding that video was great. It was my favorite thing about doing the research for this book, which is saying something considering how much cool stuff I found while I was doing the research.
That's so awesome. I often find that in research, you go through these sort of radical expansions of empathy, not in like a big progressive causes way, but in it just like, oh, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
There's
everyone is a person, and people are universally weird, and also just like wherever they are, that's normal to them.
Right. It's their normal, and everybody's just trying to find a way to have some fun. Right. So that was so entertaining for me. I loved those guys instantly. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that you peppered just enough moments of levity and like hope that they were going to pull this off throughout the book to keep my knuckles white. I also noticed, and we were talking about this the other day, that where your other books tend to include a lot of explanation, Road of Bones is very open-ended. Mm-hmm. And I wondered what prompted that departure from your usual style.
It's interesting because just the way I'm wired, I tend to want some semblance of an explanation for things, or at least a level of understanding of things. And for many, many years, I've been working with Mike Mignola, who is the creator of Hellboy. We've written several novels together and dozens of comics. And Mike comes from the other school. We share a love of folklore, but Mike creatively indulges that love more than I do, because in folklore, so often things just are never explained.
Right.
They just happen. And so Mike's feeling is always like, as long as he understands what's happening, he doesn't necessarily need to explain it to you. As long as you get the sense of what it is. And that kind of, without even really sort of realizing it, that influenced me hugely with this book, because what you're dealing with is the edge of not just of humanity, but the edge of sort of like modern life. You're out there at the edge of where people can survive, and there's forest beyond that. And it's this sort of sense that if there's anywhere on Earth that is probably still the same as it was 50,000 years ago, that's the spot to me.
Yeah.
And I feel like if there's any sense of magic, or darkness or evil or whatever it might be, that we don't know what's in that forest. And it's better that we only get a glimpse of it and that we don't really understand it. So my hope is that by the time people get to the end of the book, they certainly have a sense of what has happened. They have a sense of, it definitely has an ending.
Right.
There's a level of sadness, a level of new hope. There's a level of sacrifice and all kinds of things. But it is this sort of like, we just live here. The world is not ours. We just live on it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what the gist is at the end. And yeah, it was very freeing the moment when I realized, oh, I'm not going to tell you what this really is. I'm not going to go into a long backstory, right now. And I forgive my tangents because I go on them. Right. I haven't watched it yet, but if anybody's read any of Anne Rice's Mayfair Witches novels, my favorite thing in the first of those novels is the 150-page or whatever it is diversion in the middle of the book, where they go and tell you the entire history of the group that has been studying the Mayfair Witches for centuries. I loved that.
It's the best part.
Yeah, I loved it, but it's just like, but there's a raw beauty to being able to tell this story about being afraid of things that are unknown and leaving them unknown.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it felt almost reverent to me. Like you had a lot of respect for that place past the boundary line, which I think is really essential for being a good horror writer. You have to foster some kind of understanding in yourself that there are things against which you are more than powerless. That there's situations in life where you're effectively an insect, and it's important to live in a way that bears witness to that.
I think you're right. I think that any time you're writing anything about the supernatural in any way, or in this case, the ultra natural, I guess, you have to have that sense of the sublime, right? You have to have that sense of, of your own insignificance in the scheme of things, and that, and the best that we could hope for is to be part of it.
Yeah.
Which is a weird sort of almost uplifting way to view what is otherwise a pretty dark story.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, I don't know.
And I especially like that you're coming at it through this lens of like a prospective reality television show, which is like maybe the most squalid, venal thing I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And then to come face to face with this reality that says, no, I'm not going to be trivialized that way. You can't contain me. You can't package me for entertainment. That
Well, I
was
thought it was
really
like,
profound to me.
yeah, no, I mean, I like the idea that these two guys, one of them is American, one of them is British, but these two guys are going into this environment with their own presumptions. And they go in, as I did as a writer, to start writing the book with my own presumptions, and they are confronted with the reality that they don't really know anything, both about the reality of the way people actually live here, and also about the reality of what's out there.
Right.
And I also like, one of my favorite things about Teague as a character, for people who haven't read the book, he's a he considers himself a documentary filmmaker, but what he really does is make shows like Ice Road Truckers and stuff like that. The thing I like about it is that I have so much love and respect for the people who decide they want to do a story to tell the story of these people. The problem is that in order to sell their show, they can't just do that. They have to sensationalize it in some way.
Right.
Right. So I love the idea that somebody can go, I want to go do a show about catching tuna, but then you have to find a way to make that interesting to the executives and the people who have to market that show.
Right. It has to
All
be
that.
MILFs going out on the tuna boat or whatever.
Right, exactly. So it's like you have Teague, who's just trying to make a living doing something that he feels passionate about. But he keeps failing. This is anyway. So I like there's a certain level of innocence to this guy, even though he works in such a jaded environment.
Yeah, that comes across. He's this sort of hack as an artist or as an art promoter, but he has a little bit of insight. He has a little bit of wonder in him, which takes him from like pure P.T. Barnum to someone whose intentions are almost kind of naive.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's that I have to be P.T. Barnum in order to make a living, but how do I also be the artist? How do I also be the conveyor of information that I can share with people so they can see the world the way I see it?
Right.
And in a weird way, I kind of feel like that's what we do as writers. So I certainly do, is have to find that balance between art and commerce, right?
Absolutely.
So anyway,
I've said before, melodrama is like the visual language of our emotions. When we make something larger than life, we're trying to, this is a weird place to take it, but in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, when Willy Wonka talks about sending things via TV,
yep,
and you have to send something really enormous because it shrinks in the process.
Yeah,
it's like that. You have to dial it all up to 11 so that people who aren't in your brain can see what you're feeling.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to say it, and I think it's true. So you and I share a love, and I'm so glad we have this opportunity to organically get to this conversation. But you and I share a love for old movies, for the golden age of Hollywood, and all kinds of other movies. But I watch an inordinate number of movies that I record off of TCM, and so much so that I barely remember 90% of them because I watch them all the time. And what I try to tell other writers all the time is that so much of the time we're afraid of melodrama in modern narrative. But if you go watch these movies, these are just stories about people feeling, right? That usually they're poorly acted, but they're stories about people who feel things in a big way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with putting that into our stories now. And in fact, if you do that, those people might feel fresh to you, even though you're doing something that was done 90 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a reason that overacting and mugging have remained part of every theatrical tradition for thousands of years.
Right.
people are still doing the big emotions and giant body language of Punch and Judy in some parts of modern television. I mean, if you look at what is Jersey Shore, if not commedia dell'arte, a bunch of idiots bonking each other, which is really the purest form of entertainment.
I feel like that's the title for a new reality show. A bunch of idiots bonking each other. You've gone strangely out of focus. I don't know if that's me or.
Hang on just one moment.
I thought we might be going into a flashback sequence. We just needed the.
There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, we were gonna flash back to me rewatching Sunset Boulevard at 7 a.m. this morning. I couldn't get back to sleep.
There you go.
What would that last scene be with Norma Desmond approaching the camera and just overacting to such an extent that it's eaten her whole human personality?
Yeah.
What would it be without that? It would be nothing.
Right. That's a great way to put it too, because and we're way off, but the idea that, and Norma Desmond is every TikToker and right, and every influencer there is, because not all of them obviously, but Norma Desmond has been consumed by her desire to be seen.
Yes.
To the point
she
where
can no longer see herself.
Right. So it's sort of like the whole Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean, right? Where does one begin and the other end? And at a certain point, you forget who you are. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I'm sure we could sit here and talk about this all day.
Yes,
actually, I do have a inroad from this back to the book. One thing I was thinking about constantly as I was reading it, is the color palette that you're working with is a lot like an old movie.
Yeah.
By default, almost everything is in black and white. And within that, you still manage to find this like really textured way of describing this bleak, desolate countryside, and just the tiny segment of it that's illuminated by headlights. I was really impressed, and I wondered, like, were there aesthetic inspirations for this book?
You mean from other like books, TV, or movies?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I mean, the thing is, so much of it is just in here, right? It's in the screen in my brain.
Right.
I mean, if there's an aesthetic influence to this, it's the one that is probably the reason why I so love setting stories in a cold environment, which of course is John Carpenter's The Thing. I also am a huge fan of Howard Hawks' original The Thing from Another World, and the story they're all based on, which is Who Goes There by John W. Campbell. But you want to talk about the visual aesthetic, it's all the exterior scenes in John Carpenter's The Thing share the same visual that is in my brain when I'm writing this. But I also did watch a lot of videos made during the winter along the Colima Highway, people driving, so you can see what it's like to be on that road in the winter. And I did read a lot about it. And one of the things that I found so fascinating is, I think so often when I'm trying to envision something for the reader, I close my eyes and I put myself in the scene. What are my senses picking up in that scene? And the thing in research that I found maybe the most disturbing was that if you're there outside, you can hear the snow not falling. You can hear it like cracking, because it's so frozen that it makes noise. Like,
oh, the same way that when a pond over freezes.
Exactly.
Yeah, because there's no room for new snow.
Right. And so it's to me, it's like, this is where we are. This is how cold it is, that you don't belong here. Right. I mean, this is the thing that I like. If you didn't grow up there, of course, nobody moves there. Nobody goes, I'm going to go live there. You have to be born there
Right.
in order to live there, because nobody's going to say, I'm going to resettle in this area. Because of that, you're just, anyway.
And I think we've just arrived at the point where we should probably start switching over to the Q&A segment.
Sure.
Um,
Always happy to do that.
yeah. So listeners are welcome to post questions in the chat. And we also have a really solid batch of questions that people sent in ahead of time. So let's hop right in. Here we go. This is a good one from Arlene Babka. Would you travel a haunted highway by yourself?
Well, so I know people are always startled sometimes by this answer. I don't believe in ghosts. So I don't believe that anything is actually haunted. However, I really want to. I really want to believe in ghosts. So would I travel a haunted highway by myself? The answer to that is during the day, definitely. At night, it would depend on how far I was driving. Because even though I don't believe in ghosts, I allow for the possibility, like I want them to exist. So, I would go if you were with me, Gretchen, because then at least we would be frightened together.
I think we would have a blast doing that, honestly. And I'm the same way, it's like Teague in the book. I don't believe in ghosts, but I would love to be proven wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I want to be proven wrong.
All right, this is from Michael Walker in the chat. My first exposure to your work was the novelizations of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What sort of guidelines did they give you, and how did working on such a known bit of pop culture affect you as a writer?
Oh boy, we could spend an hour just on this, so I'll try to be succinct. I obviously it was many years ago. The series the pilot had just aired when we chased down who had the rights to the books. They were already going to be doing books. And so I was like, we have to do this. We got the opportunity, Nancy Holder and I got the opportunity to pitch. We had the same agent at the time. Well, no, we had two different agents at the time, but in any case, we got the opportunity to pitch, and we were told that if we could write the book in 4 weeks, we could do it. And we wrote it in 3.5. It was very short, very short, the first one. But it ended up being the first original Buffy the Vampire Slayer novel. There was a novelization and then our book. I have to say a number of things, not to insult anybody. I've worked with lots of fantastic editors in my career, but the editor who helped me as a writer the most was Lisa Clancy, who was my editor at Pocket during the Buffy the Vampire Slayer era. She also bought and edited my Bones Body of Evidence YA thriller series, my Prowlers YA werewolf series, and she was the most constructive as far as helping me be a better writer than any other editor I've worked with. And I worked with her a lot. She was hugely helpful for me. And then working on all the Buffy stuff in general was a huge boost because it kept me eating for a long time. During that period, I wrote a lot of those books, and it led to huge opportunities that would not probably have come otherwise. And so, I had writers who were sort of writers I looked up to at that time, giving me a hard time for doing work for hire. And some of those writers are no longer working, and so, I have nothing but good things to say about that experience. And it gave me some of my best friends in the world. Amber Benson, who played Tara on the show, is one of my best friends on earth. In fact, we're doing a big project together right now that I can't speak of at the moment, but it's going to lead to my first time directing something. So I can't, but again, all of those things came from that.
That's so cool. Yeah, no, I I think there's quite a bit of scorn in the writing field for jobbing, for
Yeah.
taking contract work. And really all I have to say about that is like, I don't know, must be nice to never have worried about money in your life.
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel, and I've always felt, this year right now, there are so many things going on that I can't share. I'm just rewriting a screenplay for a film that's probably going to go into production in March or April. So there's so many things going on that I can't share. And I feel very confident that had I not been the kind of journeyman writer that I've been my whole career, none of these things would be happening. And I tell people all the time, there was a horror writer who had a lot of success once upon a time, and named Matthew Costello. I loved his books. But one of the things I learned from Matt is that he wrote a little book about games and puzzles, like a little nonfiction book about, I think the 80s, like about Rubik's Cube and stuff like that, and video games, this little book. Because of that book, he was asked to write The Seventh Guest, which was one of the very first sort of big sort of computer games, like
Yeah.
like RPG computer games, right? And he made, I don't want to, but as far as I know, he made it over $1 million for that game. And I always looked at Matt and said, he would never have had the opportunity he had to do that if he hadn't taken the job that he took to write that little book about games. And he took that book about little games because he was interested in it. So I always tell writers, if it's something that is appealing to you, if it's interesting to you, do it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, don't do it if it's not something that interests you. That's going to come through in the work.
Absolutely. You can't drag yourself through stuff
Right.
like that.
Yeah. You can't fake it.
No. So this one comes from Ryan Burson. What book of yours are you most proud of?
I've written a lot of books, and there are so many different answers to that question. I think the real answer is always you're most proud of the one that's getting the most attention.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh, I must have done a good job on that because people seem to like it. So you get proud of that. But if I'm looking at it from if I turn the camera a little bit, right? One of the books that I'm most proud of is a novel called Strangewood, which I was many years ago. But I felt like that was the book that I grew up as a writer. It was the first book that I wrote about sort of more sophisticated things, more adult themes, and and that sort of thing. And I also would say I did these books called Body of Evidence. There were 10 of them, this YA mystery thriller series. And the thing that I'm so proud of with those books at the time is that I got unending emails and letters from usually from girls in junior high or high school who said they wanted to work in science, they wanted to work in the medical field, they wanted to work in forensic science because they read those books. And also from kids and from their parents who said, like parents would email me and say, my child never liked to read, but I gave them this book and now they just are reading nonstop. And honestly, like, I'm so proud of Road of Bones because I think, like Strangewood, it's a book where I feel like I turned a corner creatively, and in the kind of writing I'm doing. But if you ask me what makes me most proud, what I'm most proud of is the kids that started liking to read because of me, and the kid who said, I got an A in my English class and my teacher says it's because of you, and stuff like that. I haven't written young adult in many years, but those things were the things that made me proud.
That's really special.
So.
Oh, getting a little teary-eyed over here. So this one comes from Diana DeVol. Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry. Jeff Strittmater. Who's a lesser known horror writer you would like to spotlight?
Wow. First of all, I cringe at the phrase lesser known because it
Feels backhanded.
what's that? Yes. I mean, it kind of it feels like who am I to say, right? There are lots of people who will have read some of the writers that I would say that I might respond with, who have never heard of me. So I'm cringe at that. But in general, how about we say some of the more recent writers on the scene? And in that way, I think of Violet Castro, also called V Castro. I think she's terrific. Obviously, I'm a massive fan of Manhunt, and everybody should pick up Gretchen's book, Manhunt. It is not for the faint of heart, and but it's terrific and one of my favorite books I read last year. Boy, let me see. Well, I mean, again, I would have said Gabino Iglesias, but Gabino's now nominated for everything for his book, The Devil Takes You Home.
Yeah.
And so I think, is he lesser known now? I don't think that's a really accurate way to describe him. And also, I guess I would say, in addition to all of the new kids, I would encourage people to sort of seek out some of the writers who are no longer with us, or who have been around for a while, who they may have missed. I'm going to take the opportunity to recommend that everybody read my friend Rick Howdala, who passed away 10 years ago next month. He was one of the formative writers in horror in the 80s and early 90s, and for the entire month of February, a bunch of people were all going to be reading his novel, The Nightstone, which was like a 1 million copy bestseller because it had a hologram on the cover. It was the first book with a hologram on the cover. Huge, but I don't know. I'm trying to think of I don't know. I mean, it's just Cynthia Paleo. Again, these are not people that need my help. Victor Laval does not need my referring. So anyway, I'll keep thinking, but
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's always good to not just poke back through sort of the annals of recent horror history, because it's surprising the massive successes who just sort of disappear.
Yeah.
The one that always gets me is Melanie Tem, who was a huge deal in the paperback in the 80s. And then she died prematurely of cancer, and really her legacy just vanished.
Yeah.
And I would say that probably Wilding is the best werewolf novel ever written.
Yeah.
So it's always strange to me. And it's a great new crop out there this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of crazy how I mean, horror is just we're having a moment, and it's interesting too, because I came into this field during the crash.
Right.
And so many times everyone's horror is coming back, and it just is like, no, it's not. But over the last few years, it really has, and we've seen Paul Tremblay and Stephen Graham Jones, and I mean, obviously Joe Hill, and I don't know, so much stuff. I loved S.A. Barnes. Is it Dead Space? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
I love those kinds of stories too, and there's just so much great stuff.
Yeah.
Eric LaRocca's short stories and novellas.
Oh man, Eric is a machine gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never seen anyone write that fast and that well.
Dead Silence. Thank you, Kelly Lonesome.
Thank you. Kelly's my editor at Tor, actually. Yes. I love her. Hi, Kelly.
Yeah, she's in there.
Yeah, it's certainly an exciting time to be a horror author. There's so much happening. And, obviously it has a lot to do with the explosion in horror film. The last, I would say probably 2 decades, there's at least one classic horror film a year.
Yeah.
which is an incredible run.
Yes. It is incredible, especially because they're not all by the same people.
Right.
You know,
They're very diverse.
because All Hallows comes out tomorrow and it's set in the 1980s. I'm actually going to be doing a bunch of 1980s trivia tomorrow night at my launch event. And I was looking at it, and one of the questions involves the run that John Carpenter had in the 1980s. And it's sort of like, but right now we're having this run where every year it's someone else who steps forward with something incredible.
Yeah.
But you're right. Years ago I was the guest of honor at British Fantasy Con, and what I was talking about there was the difference I felt there was between US and UK horror, and how I felt that in the US horror was more looked down upon during that period, because when people thought of horror, they thought of the horror films that were most familiar to them. And I love all those movies, but let's face it, they're all trashy.
Right.
Right. And the British had a much healthier respect for horror stories and a much healthier tradition of horror stories, because they weren't thinking about that. They had their own touchstones. They had Christmas ghost stories and all of that stuff. And so it makes me so happy what's happened in the last decade and a half, especially here, because people now, when they think of horror movies, the first thing they think of isn't Freddy and Jason.
Right.
And it's Jordan Peele. It's Babadook. It's The Witch. And so I do feel like that's had a huge impact on people's willingness to say, oh, I like horror.
Yeah,
Or I'm
absolutely.
open to it.
There's been a change in critical messaging.
Exactly.
Horror movies can now be critically acclaimed in a way that they basically never were before. Even well-received horror movies, there was no way you'd see them talked about in like the New Yorker. That happens now.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy. And Christina Freeman just said, those of us of a certain age still think of Jason and Freddy. I do too.
And well, you should.
Right. But that's my point, is that people don't think only of that.
Right.
They don't dismiss horror as just slasher stuff,
Right.
And now if they think about slasher stuff, they think about the novels that Stephen Graham Jones is writing, which are fantastic, so.
Yeah. No, there's nothing that I love more in any fiction than descriptions of something that the author is clearly passionate about. And for anyone who knows me, I'm not a sports girl. When I was made to participate in basketball as a child, I laid face down on the gym floor and refused to move for over an hour.
Fantastic.
Which was effective. I did not have to play basketball. But I love the descriptions of basketball in The Only Good Indians. I think they're incredible. Like, he just brings this intense scrutiny to everything that he writes about.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes you want to know everything about everything he talks about.
Yeah.
Really, he's a hell of an author.
Yeah. And I have this problem where I try to tell my daughter the plots of all the old movies that I watch, and somehow I don't have the same impact that Stephen Graham Jones has when he wants to tell you about basketball. Because she's like, Dad, I don't want to hear it.
Sometimes it just takes a while. Maybe she'll come to it on her own.
Maybe. I hope so.
And if not, there's plenty of other wonderful things to be into. None of them are as good, obviously.
Of course. Yeah. Let's be real.
All right, I think we have time for one or two more.
Sure. We can lightning round a few.
Yeah. All right. 19 from Abina Miles. What was your hardest scene to write in Road of Bones, and why?
So, for the same reason that we talked about earlier, and again, without spoilers, it's a scene very near the end of the book. It's a scene very near the end of the book, because in my mind, it's a film.
I was going to say, inshallah, though.
Yeah, exactly. uh, and it's hard to talk about it without giving it away, but it's the moment that everything turns on in the finale, because it's the moment that, if it doesn't work, is going to push the reader out of the story. It's the most magical is the right word, but gives the wrong intent. But it's the most supernatural moment in the story. There's also a moment. There's also a moment in the story where a backup. You have to trust yourself as a writer. Clive Barker taught me that, and there's a moment in the story where there's a bear, and the bear comes out of the woods and a bunch of animals are around, and the bear has several other smaller animals riding on its back, which would never happen in reality. And in a way, that moment is sort of like the upright shoe in Nope. It's the moment, it's the impossible shot, right? It's the moment that can't happen.
Right.
And if you do it wrong, it's silly. So it's this thing is like, can you pull it off without people feeling that that moment is silly? And in the climactic moment that I'm talking about, it's the, can you pull off this climactic moment that is so weird without people feeling it's too weird? And if I can be successful in, with 9 out of 10 people who read the book get through that scene and don't think it's too weird, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I've always found that in order to touch the sublime, you have to skate pretty close to the ridiculous.
Yes.
Is
Great.
a good maxim. For what it's worth, I think you absolutely killed it. That moment didn't even ding my radar. I was just so absorbed.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It's, but it's scary when you're writing it,
Absolutely.
You're just like, is this
thinking
going
about it,
to,
right? Is it going to land?
yeah. So.
All right. Who is your favorite character in Road of Bones? This comes from Rachel Donovan.
So my favorite character in Road of Bones is not Una, the little girl. My favorite character in Road of Bones, weirdly, is Nari, who is the local woman that whose car has broken down and they pick up along the way. And because, again, we're going to get heady again, but so because Nari is this person who is like the rest of us, I feel, or most of us if we're lucky. So Teague and Prentice are there specifically looking for mystery. They're looking for mysteries, but also answers to try to find something that will give their careers a boost and give their lives some interest and hope. Nari is just sort of going about her life on a daily basis and trying to make the best of her days. But she's not conscious about the fact that she's on the same hunt that they're on. She's looking for the same things that they're looking for, but just not focused on the fact that that's what she's really looking for. And she finds it. So that's why I like her the best.
Yeah. No, that sequence where they pick her up is one of my favorite parts of the book. All right, let's crush one more.
Okay.
All right. Where did you find the story of Bugatti Musun and local folklore? And how did it lead to the development of your story?
So again, that was, oh boy, I don't want to give anything away. Let me succinctly say about folkloric research that in this story, I feel that there are several different levels of folklore. There's the folklore about the horrible, horrible things that actually happened, that sort of have built up a modern folklore in that part of the world. Then there's the folklore of the indigenous peoples of that region, some of which is still, there's still a good portion of the population who practice a shamanistic religion in that population. So again, it was like that thing where I was like, I didn't want to present that, but then when I did my research, I was like, no, this is real. But then there's another level of folklore beneath all of that that's entirely invented and appears in many of my works, which is this idea of a world before the world, of a people before the people, and of a kind of level of wilderness spirits, and that exist sort of like, I always say that, we have this folklore about vampires. There must have been something that inspired the people at the beginning of humanity to come up with stories about vampires.
Right.
And so in this, it's sort of like, well, the folklore of this region is in and of itself its own folklore, but it has deeper roots, and those roots are probably shared. So we get a little bit of that in this book. That particular story was something that I stumbled upon completely accidentally, because I was already writing about the presence of this larger ancient spirit that sort of exists in the woods, that's towering over the forest and things like that. I was already writing that, and I stopped myself and I thought, well, I'll bet you that there's something kind of like that in the folklore of the region. And in a weird way, that creature, that spirit, connects the real folklore with the stuff that I make up.
That's so cool.
But it's always you have to be very careful, because I want to be respectful of the real stuff, but I also don't want to not be able to invent my own stuff. So it's a I don't know, it's a strange thing, a path to walk, so I do not want people to think that I'm presenting the folklore in this book as indigenous to the region. Some of it is, some of it isn't. So
yeah, no, that's something that I always have to sit and spend a good deal of time figuring out for myself. I think you pulled it off extremely well here. It felt very respectful, and of course, making up new stories is part of the tradition of folklore in and of itself.
thank you, I appreciate it.
So I think that we're at the end of our time.
Yep.
But I just wanted to say, everyone listening, you can get Chris Golden's Road of Bones at Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, wherever books are sold. And as far as I'm concerned, you absolutely should. This is a
thank you.
career best from someone who
Thank you.
was already riding high. Chris, thank you so much for asking me to come and share this with you.
I really appreciate it, Gretchen. And again, like, everybody should buy Manhunt, and thank you to Barnes & Noble for hosting us. And everybody should go pick up Road of Bones from those beautiful table displays that they've got set up for another week at your local Barnes & Noble. And I'm just so grateful to them. So thank you very much, Gretchen. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And yes, thank you, Barnes & Noble.
Bye-bye.